There is a particular kind of limbo that only the person who has loved an avoidant fully understands. It is not the clean, if devastating clarity of a relationship that has ended. It is not the uncomplicated warmth of one that is genuinely working. It is something in between, a relational middle ground that has no good name and no clear exit, and that the avoidant, consciously or not, maintains with a precision that keeps the person they are with perpetually suspended between the hope of more and the grief of less. Never fully in, never fully out, always in the specific, exhausting position of someone who is trying to navigate a connection whose terms are never quite established and whose future is never quite decided. This limbo is not accidental. It is not a byproduct of confusion or ambivalence in any ordinary sense. It is the external expression of an internal war that the avoidant has been fighting in one form or another across every significant relationship of their adult life. A war between two forces that are equally genuine, equally powerful, and fundamentally irreconcilable without the kind of internal work that most avoidants are not currently doing. The force that will not fully commit and the force that will not fully let go. Understanding both, understanding what generates each of them and why they coexist in the same person with the same intensity, is the key to understanding not just the avoidant, but the specific pain of loving one. And perhaps more importantly, the key to understanding what that pain is actually telling you about the decision that, at some point, only you can make. Why they will not fully commit. The avoidant's resistance to full commitment is not, at its root, about you. This is one of the most important and most difficult truths to hold clearly when you are the person standing on the receiving end of the resistance, because it feels personal. It feels like a verdict on your worth, on the adequacy of what you are offering, on whether you are the kind of person who inspires the commitment that others apparently receive without having to negotiate for it. The feeling is understandable. The conclusion it generates is wrong. The resistance is structural. It is built into the avoidance attachment system at a level that operates beneath conscious intention, beneath even the avoidant's own understanding of why they behave as they do. It was installed long before you arrived, through the specific and formative experiences of an attachment history that taught the avoidant at the developmental level where the most durable lessons are learned that full commitment was not safe, that giving someone the full weight of their investment, allowing another person to become genuinely, consequentially, irreplaceably necessary, was the precondition for the specific kind of loss that their system classifies as catastrophic. Full commitment requires full exposure. It requires the acknowledgement, made visible through consistent and sustained behavior, that another person's presence in your life is not incidental but essential, that their absence would not simply be inconvenient or unfortunate, but genuinely, significantly damaging to your interior world. That you have, in the full and vulnerable sense of the word, needed someone. And need, for the avoidant, is the most dangerous word in the emotional vocabulary. It is the admission that strips the self-sufficiency of its defensibility. The acknowledgement that the walls were never quite as complete as the performance suggested. There is also something more specific that full commitment threatens in the avoidant, something beyond the general vulnerability of need. Full commitment closes options, not in the practical sense of limiting who else they might be with. That is not primarily what frightens them, but in the psychological sense of removing the exit, of establishing, through the explicit and mutual acknowledgement of serious investment, that the connection is now something that cannot be casually or painlessly withdrawn from. The avoidant, whose entire relational strategy has depended on the availability of the exit, the psychological reassurance that they could, at any point, return to the self-contained equilibrium of not being in this, finds the prospect of closing the exit not romantic, but terrifying. The exit is not just a practical option, it is a psychological lifeline. The proof, maintained at all times and at some level of consciousness, that the closeness is chosen rather than trapped. That the connection is something they are in by continuous election rather than by binding consequence. Full commitment eliminates the continuous election. It replaces it with something that looks, to the avoidant's fear, indistinguishable from a trap. Why they will not fully let go, and yet they do not go. This is the other half of the equation, the half that makes the limbo so specifically, so uniquely painful for the person on the receiving end. Because if the avoidant simply left, if the commitment resistance translated cleanly and directly into departure, the situation would be painful, but it would be clear. The grief would have a defined beginning. The healing could start. The person left behind could begin the work of building a life that does not have the avoidant at its uncertain center, but the avoidant does not fully go. They stay in the periphery. They maintain a connection that is intimate enough to prevent the mourning of its loss, but not committed enough to constitute the relationship that genuine intimacy requires. They offer enough warmth to sustain the hope, enough distance to prevent the security. And the combination of the two, the warmth that says stay and the distance that says but not too close, is the precise configuration that produces the limbo. That keeps the other person suspended in the relational middle ground that serves, in ways the avoidant may never consciously acknowledge, several important psychological functions. The not letting go is, in part, about genuine feeling. The avoidant has real attachment to the person they are with, real investment, real caring, the specific and irreplaceable quality of connection with a particular person that their self-sufficiency has never quite been able to make unnecessary. Letting go would mean losing this. And whatever the avoidant's relationship with their own need, they are not immune to the weight of genuine loss. The prospect of the specific absence of a specific person who has become, despite all their management efforts, genuinely significant. This prospect carries a cost the avoidant is not willing to pay. But the not letting go is also, and perhaps more honestly, about the avoidant's own regulation. The presence of the other person, available, oriented toward them, sustained in the connection by the breadcrumbs of warmth the avoidant offers, serves a regulatory function that is not always consciously acknowledged. It provides the background warmth of being someone's something, without requiring the full exposure of full commitment. It supplies the avoidant with the emotional sustenance of genuine attachment while maintaining the self-protective distance that makes the sustenance feel manageable. The other person's continued investment is, in this dynamic, a resource the avoidant is drawing on, not maliciously, not strategically in any deliberate sense, but functionally. The staying of the other person meets a need the avoidant cannot fully acknowledge having. The cruelty of the middle ground. It would be incomplete to examine this dynamic without naming what it costs the person living inside it. Because the limbo, however understandable its origins in the avoidance psychology, however genuinely the product of fear rather than cruelty, has a specific and significant impact on the person it is maintained around. The middle ground erodes. It erodes self-trust, the capacity to read a situation clearly and act on the reading, because the signals the avoidant sends are contradictory enough to make any clear reading feel uncertain. It erodes self-worth, not through any single act of dismissal, but through the slow, accumulating message of being consistently almost chosen, of being close enough to see what full choosing would look like, and far enough from it that the gap becomes its own kind of verdict. It erodes the capacity for the clean, uncomplicated investment that healthy connection requires. Because investing fully in someone who has not invested fully in return is a risk that the evidence of the dynamic keeps making feel unjustified. And it steals time. This is perhaps the most significant cost, and the least often named directly. The time spent in the limbo is time that belongs to your life, to the building of connections that can actually hold you, to the development of intimacy that does not require the continuous management of someone else's fear, to the ordinary but precious experience of being in a relationship where both people are present, both people are committed, and the terms of the connection are not perpetually, exhaustingly unresolved. What changes everything, and what does not? The limbo breaks in one of two ways. Either the avoidant reaches the internal threshold at which the cost of the commitment resistance finally exceeds the cost of the vulnerability commitment requires, arrives, through genuine internal work or the specific weight of accumulated loss at the place where full presence becomes more possible than full protection. Or the person in the limbo makes the decision that only they can make, that the middle ground is no longer an acceptable address, that the hope that sustains the staying has been examined honestly and found insufficient as the foundation of a life. Neither of these is easy. Neither arrives on a convenient timeline. and neither can be forced from the outside, not through patience, not through the perfect combination of warmth and distance, not through any strategy or approach that places the resolution of the limbo in the hands of the person who is suffering it rather than the person who is creating it. The avoidant will not fully commit because commitment requires the surrender of the exit they have been protecting since before you arrived in their life. They will not fully let go because letting go requires the acknowledgement of a loss they are not yet equipped to face. And you, standing in the space between those two refusals, carrying the weight of a connection that is real enough to stay for and incomplete enough to grieve, deserve to know that the limbo is not your failure. It is their unfinished work. And the most important question you will ever ask in relation to this person is not whether they will ever finish it. It is how long you are willing to wait to find out